Welcome to Comms First, everybody. This session is called The User-Centric Approach to Migrating from Skype for Business to Teams. And today is presented by Tony Nunn. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about the adoption approach to moving users from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams. Obviously looking at the consequences of COVID-19 and how in some cases that has influenced organisations' decisions around either adoption per se or the lack of adoption. Look at what crisis readiness is in relation to business readiness, and also look longer term as to once you have got the solution in the field, what your perception of evergreening and operational mode is for your organisation. So with that, let's press on. So firstly, just a little bit about me. So yeah, I'm Tony Nunn. I work as a solution architect and technical lead for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise in the advisory and professional services business unit of the organisation. I'm the global technical lead for intelligent and unified communication. I've been with the organisation for 10 years. I'm working with everything from LCS through OCS, Link, Skype, you name it, for a considerable amount of time, having implemented some very large global solutions around the portfolio. I'm an internal Office 365 global ambassador, so I regularly attend sessions such as this, traditionally in person, and present on a variety of different topics relating to the Microsoft 365 portfolio. I'm also an Office 365 adoption specialist, so hence today's presentation in relation to not just what, you know, the bread and butter of adoption is, but also what my perception of the realism is of adoption, having, as I say, worked on a number of in-field deployments. A couple of things about me. I'm an NFL fan. I used to tell people I was a football fan, but given my location in the country, if you can understand my accent and dialect, I now tell people I'm an NFL fan. I like a good thrill. I like the adrenaline to be flowing, and quite frankly, especially during COVID, the implementation of Teams solutions gets that adrenaline running. I like to travel, or at least I used to before the pandemic. I'm a Formula One fan, so consequently really enjoyed the Grand Prix coming back last weekend. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell. My contact details are in that right element there. Feel free to either follow me on Twitter. My daily posts are generically about Teams as per se, or reach me directly through my corporate email address or on LinkedIn. So, with every good conference, and I hope you've been really enjoying Converse thus far, we are only as good as both the presenters and also our sponsors. And it's with that, you know, we have to thank all of the sponsors, predominantly Microsoft Ribbon and Audio Codes as the top tier ones, for their assistance in putting this whole event together, especially given the sort of climate that we currently find ourselves in. So, Skype for Business retirement. We all know it, it's coming. A lot of organisations had tentatively looked at moving away from Skype for Business over the course of the next 12 months or so, and had created a roadmap strategy for that. However, COVID has exacerbated the necessity for a quality of service that, frankly, Skype for Business traditionally can't deliver. So that it's brought forward an accelerated delivery opinion as to getting users working more productively with Teams today. But that necessarily doesn't mean that you can eliminate some of the traditional things that a migration or transition strategy would have previously dictated on your behalf. You still need to look at assessing your environment to ensure that as you transition across, that you are meeting all of the complexities and necessities that the infrastructure previously would have led to you. So network readiness, governance and compliance readiness, security capability, all of those traditional elements that you would have done, identity and authentication. But what can we anticipate now, given that in the new norm as we find ourselves, how will that change our approach? So in that light, we'll talk about how we should still put users at the heart of everything we are going to do in relation to deploying teams in today's climate. We also want to talk about the fact that, in essence, once we have deployed, simply saying that, you know, it's a sink or swim approach to adoption isn't going to create any lesser an extent of issues for you going forward. But also, what do you do once the solution's out there? How do you provide business continuity and subsequently ensure that your operational and evergreening model is in place to facilitate ongoing return? And we'll talk about that. So how can teams help with your crisis-ready strategy? Well, we all find ourselves in some way, shape or form now traditionally working from home. As I say, I've worked as a mobile operative pretty much for the past 10 years in my current guise. But in reality, this is fresh to a lot of organizations working at arm's length with their colleagues, peers and clients. But you want to leverage what tooling and what solutions you have at your hands. As I say, a lot of organizations were in the process of traditionally moving to Teams anyway. I know a lot of businesses who I was speaking to pre-lockdown who were saying to me that, yeah, we want to go to Teams. We are in some ways being forced to Teams. But frankly, we've got a very holistic approach to what traditional tooling we use. We still will use WebEx. We still will use Zoom. From a telephony perspective, we'll capitalize and utilize what we currently have in place, whether it be Skype for Business using OPCH, or whether it be using some leveraged form of calling plan within the cloud. What they've found is that isn't productive. And frankly, we already knew that. But how now has COVID actually forced the hand of organizations? So they've looked at it and they've said, okay, from a collaboration perspective, we want individuals to feel like they're in a traditional office space. We want people to work collaboratively. We want them to use a more productive interface that means that they're not jumping between one that delivers telephony, one that delivers collaboration, one that delivers communication. So consequently, they want to bring it all together. Teams gives them that. We all know it's regarded as the single hub and the pane of glass interface that delivers all of the portfolio offerings and workloads that Microsoft 365 provides today. But again, traditionally, organizations would simply say, all right, so we're going to force your hand. There's the technology. We want you to use it. That doesn't work best when trying to get an increased adoption uptake within your organization. So what we do is we say, how does the collaboration architecture that we have allow our employees to work productively in together? How can we maintain the cost saving and the pound or dollar per user approach that we traditionally would have used in an on-premise environment? So a lot of organizations are posing those same questions, and I hope you're hearing those out as well. So crisis readiness versus business continuity, how do we experience it? So why are we here? As I said, COVID, frankly, has almost put a gun to our head and said, you know what, if you want to work in a more productive fashion, how are you going to do it? Are you going to, the British government are a prime example of this, working internally, as we all are aware, using Teams, but they're externally using Zoom. So providing, again, that confused approach to what is the best product for them. How do we deliver business continuity? How can we ensure that essentially what we were having previous, prior to COVID and prior to lockdown, is still being delivered by way of a quality solution for our end users, giving us the best experience for those users, but also addressing the issues and previous pitfalls that our legacy technology might have delivered on to those users. How can we communicate better? We want the whole organization to work as one, whether they are globally dispersed, geographically dispersed, whether they're different business units, whether they're working from home over mobile, or whether they are sitting, as hopefully we come back to the office locations, on LAN or on WAN. How can we do all of that quickly? How can we implement a solution that will give us all of this capability now? We can't wait. Teams will deliver that. And whether you are currently an on-premise Skype for Business server solution, or whether you are already halfway down your roadmap implementation of currently being in Skype for Business Online, or maybe you've even jumped to using Teams, dare I say, in islands mode, and you're actually using concurrently a number of different UC solutions. How do you get that out there quickly and effectively so that it's not creating numerous service tickets, numerous issues to your network capability, and so on and so forth? So I make the move to Teams. Skype for Business did the job. You know, everybody knows that. Why did Microsoft force our hands to go to Teams? Well, ultimately, it's because it's a much better product. Yes, you might not like the interface, and I hear this constantly. The way I traditionally look at it is that if you ever went from even going back to LCS through to OCS and then subsequently to Link, the biggest change, to my acknowledgement, throughout that entire sort of historical roadmap was that the color changed at the top of the user interface. Ultimately, though, the interface was still the same. Suddenly, you're presented with this big, bold, purple interface, a single pane of glass that gives you access to all of the portfolio workloads that Microsoft 365 delivers in the background without the necessity to have to open up your email client, have to open up a Yammer client, have to go to a SharePoint site. All of those are integrated into that single interface, giving you a more productive solution. But also, because we're leveraging regional edge for each of those individual users also, it means that we're getting a better level of quality of experience, both for voice and video capability. No longer are we being prohibited by having to deploy a tenant solution, for instance, in the US, but then service it from service users that might be in the UK, and leveraging a bad quality of experience because of that. No longer do we have the complexity of making sure that when users join conference calls, that again, they are using a conference breakout that is local to them now with Microsoft Teams, whereas previously they may have had to either piggyback a poor network connection or leverage an inoperable local geographical tool calling for audio dialing. Teams provides them with a multitude of numerous facets that, quite frankly, Skype for Business just didn't reach. Now, that's not saying that Skype for Business doesn't have its place and that Skype for Business still doesn't provide benefits by way of some of the modalities and features that haven't transitioned or migrated across to Teams as yet, but frankly, it is a much better platform. And as I've already said, our hand is going to be forced. As of July next year, Skype for Business Online will no longer exist. Now, in a normal environment, the first thing we would do is pilot Teams. We would roll it out to the organization, to a select group of users. We would iron out the kinks, and then we would do it on a larger scale, a velocity deployment to our end users, rolling into the field in a production-ready capability. So we could identify, ultimately, where governance and compliance should be implemented. We could force the use of naming conventions, of guest access, so forth. What a lot of organizations have done, and again, we come back to crisis ready versus business ready, is they've simply taken the pragmatic approach of saying, you know, we need a solution now. And irrespective of what issues it's going to cost us longer term, let's get it out there. Let's just deploy it. Our users are savvy and intelligent enough to actually just pick this up and use it. And in a lot of cases, that may well be the case. But ultimately, we're working in quite a unique environment at this moment in time. Not just from the perspective of COVID, but also we are finding ourselves currently where we're working with a number of different genres. Generation X, Generation Y, millennials, so on and so forth. Individuals who traditionally have different ways of educating or training themselves and then subsequently adopting the technology that we provide. So it's how do you address all of those, but at arm's length? And then again, we would normally provide ourselves with a process whereby adoption, as it grows, we can utilize frameworks that we would have in place. We can use the change management capabilities that we had. We can build platforms that deliver online training, digital training, web-based training, so on and so forth. Now, that is the traditional facet that we would approach. However, that shouldn't just be now just crumpled up and thrown in a bin. That still provides us with a framework to deliver adoption and ensure that we are getting the best use of the technology at hand. So how do we do that now? We put the user at the heart of it. So again, technology is no more than an enabler, whether it's technology pre-COVID or whether it's technology in today's norm. You are still utilizing a facility that delivers on your behalf what the business outcomes are that you require, but hopefully what the user requires as well. Now, generally, you would, and again, this is what we would deem the standard approach. We would identify a persona, we would identify a mapping between what the user requires today against what the issues are that the legacy technology is delivering to them. And we would subsequently say, okay, let's deliver X, Y, Z. In the case of Teams, let's make sure you can utilize voice and video capability. If you're necessarily requiring telephony capability, you might be a road warrior. Let's make sure that you're given provision of either direct routing or calling plans so that you have an identified telephone number. If you're a call center user, you might say that we want to ensure that you have a cloud-ready solution that integrates directly into Teams and delivers the same leverage capability that you're working with today, but again, in an enhanced fashion. So Anywhere 365 might provide that. So we look at all of those and we do almost a plan in a page approach to what the user requires from the moment they wake up to the moment they leave their office workspace, whether that's in office or whether that's remote office. What are their culture? What are their principles? What do they require? What is their skills gaps? So then once you've got that simple approach of putting the user at the heart of everything you do, build the technology around it. You don't necessarily need to go out, and I apologize if there's anybody from Microsoft listening into this, and buy E5 licenses for everybody. You know, some people don't require to have advanced threat protection. Some people don't necessarily require the ability to have phone system. They just simply may be office workers who need to communicate and collaborate internally with their peers and colleagues and not externally with clients or customers. Once we have the enabled technology around us, then we can facilitate a process which gives us the security, governance and compliance that meets all of our requirements internally as an organization, but also doesn't restrict or constrain our end user from being productive and doing their job to the best of their ability. And again, in the current environment that we find ourselves, a lot of organizations have just simply gone, you know what? Let's roll Teams out. Let's open Pandora's box. Forget naming conventions, forget security. Who cares if they can get in and actually share files with Bill, who lives down the road? He's got free Teams. But, you know, all of these things still need to be considered. So what are the goals? Each organization, whether it be pre-COVID or today, have in their mind? What is at the forefront of their mindset? It needs to create a modern environment, a capability that means that you are providing the best level of user experience, be it your internal users, your employees, or your external users by extension, who are your customers. They have to be there to create open spaces and digital capability that can facilitate communication and collaboration, within whichever element you find yourselves in, your internal or external bubble. We still want to be able to easily share content and documentation. We still want to work seamlessly together. But what we want to be able to do is to control that and govern how we do that. We want to have a simplified and quality meeting experience. We want a user to be able to do everything from the position of using that single interface, whether that be scheduling or generating an ad hoc meeting with a number of individuals, be it one-on-one or multiple. We want them to be able to work with users who were legacy in Skype for Business. So we want to provide interop where capable, but we also want to be able to do create tooling that gives us the ability to provide both proprietary and bespoke applications that might be our line of business capability from within that same interface. Teams will allow us to do that. As we've talked about previously, the whole network structure and localized edge of Microsoft Teams means that we get a more reliable and better quality of service for our end users. We still need to do our network due diligence. We still need to make sure that where necessary, we're avoiding some of the traditional pitfalls of VPN or proxy. And we still look at those and still need to make sure that, again, we're not just rolling out a crisis-ready solution that isn't going to provide issues longer term because we haven't done those assessed necessities. And we want to make sure that when we do all of our upgrades or provide any level of capability that is new to the service, that we're not creating a service interruption in regards of all of that. It's not going to impact on the end user. Teams provides all of that. And again, this is the approach to evergreening going forward around your operational model of support for your end users. So, coming back to what we originally discussed, Skype for Business to Teams. So traditionally today, if you're using Skype for Business online, you have both messaging, calendaring, or conferencing and calling capability that gives you the ability to both communicate internally with your organization or federate externally with customers and clients or partners. So to get those users from a user perspective across to Teams. Now, again, I have talked to numerous organizations over the course of the last 4 months or so who have simply gone, you know what, we were partway there anyway, let's just throw Teams out. So they've omitted some of this side-by-side approach, and they've actually thrown the client at the user, forced them into Teams only mode without looking at what dependencies lie around the solution as a whole. So for instance, if you're using on-premise call handling, what dependencies do you have for interacting or interop with the previous Skype for Business implementation that you had? If you're federating to an organization that haven't moved to the cloud yet, how do you ensure that you can communicate with those users externally of your Teams interface? Traditionally, Skype for Business on-premise or Skype for Business server isn't permitted to federate to Skype for Business, to Teams, sorry. However, one little known fact is irrelevant of have you implemented a hybrid capability for your Skype for Business on-prem to Office 365, is that if you're actually using AD Connect and subsequently migrating or syncing your attributes from your existing infrastructure to Azure, that it will actually take across your MSRTC SIP attribute into the cloud. So irrespective of the fact that you don't have a hybrid in place, you can actually have a backdoor way facilitating federated communication to a Skype for Business on-prem organization. And that works. Not well documented, but it works. It's not best practice and it's not supported by Microsoft. So what we would traditionally do is work in tandem in islands mode, giving the users the ability to work in isolation of one another using Skype for Business and Teams. Getting all of the benefits of Teams today, but using all of the traditional elements of Skype for Business for modalities such as telco calling. When we're in a position and when we're confident that all of those dependencies have been met, and I mentioned the ones around federation and around telephony capability, or when we're ensuring that our users, quite frankly, have adopted the technology and are comfortable with the new interface, we can move lock, stock and barrel into Teams and simply provide a solution that is based solely around Microsoft 365 with Microsoft Teams. Teams only mode. But again, we have a capability whereby we haven't removed in its entirety Skype for Business client from the end user. Legacy organizations who schedule and generate Skype for Business meetings, our users can still join those meetings. If you're an on-prem organization, what is the mechanism by which you can then subsequently get your users to Teams? Now, there are a number of ways, actually. If you're Skype for Business Server 2015, realistically, unless you use the backdoor capability I've mentioned with MSRTC SIP, you have to implement a hybrid capability into Office 365, and then subsequently move your users to Office 365 and then transition them into Teams. But using, again, that same leveraged approach of making sure that you do everything in parallel, and at the point in time where you're confident you've met dependencies, mitigated all of the reliance that you currently have on your on-premise infrastructure, that you can then consequently move to Teams natively, using all of the capability that it delivers today. But it's not a smooth transition. It still provides complexity by way of implementing a hybrid solution and moving all of the dependent services that you might have. I've talked with organizations who have simply requested that they go for Skype for Business on-prem to Teams without the necessity for a hybrid. Now, there are ways and means. Obviously, we can implement a new server infrastructure on-prem. We can move those users to Skype for Business Server 2019, which removes the complexity and necessity for a hybrid. But that's a cost measure. There are obviously implications to doing all of that. This might be complex in some people's eyes, but it's still the more transparent and smooth operational mode of moving users to Teams. In the current climate with COVID, I can understand that some organizations will find this simply too complex, too much of a cumbersome burden in the basis that they have to implement that hybrid capability. They want to use Teams now. And as I say, I've talked to organizations who have simply gone, you know what, if all I'm going to get by moving my users into Skype for Business Online is that I can move their existing contact list, well, frankly, they can manually import it into Teams. Again, that is creating complexity to the end user. It's a confused message to the end user. It's not transparent in getting them to the new end goal and aspirational approach of using Microsoft Teams. So consequently, I've known organizations who've tried to do this during COVID, and the end user has simply gone, you know what, this is far too difficult for me. I'm going to fall back on Shadow IT. I'm going to use what mechanisms I've got at hand. I'll install Zoom for free. I'll work with WhatsApp. You know, traditional Shadow IT solutions that are freely available to the end user, but can't be governed and controlled by you, the organization. So you want to put the user at the heart of your transition. So subsequently, coming back to that approach of a user-centric transformation, whereby, yeah, it might be complex from a traditional technology standpoint, but ultimately, if your end goal is to ensure that users are productive using Teams and are getting a quality of experience in a transparent fashion, you know, that should be a minor consideration as far as I'm concerned. So what is interop? So interop gives users the ability to interact with those traditional end users who are still employing legacy capability. So again, without having that hybrid element in between, or the MSRTC SIP backdoor notarization, how do you get your large-scale user community, some of whom maybe still using Skype for Business, might have a legacy requirement to federate to, and I have had this, organizations who are still running LCS. How do you get that capability so that users who have made the jump to Teams natively can still work and interact with those Skype for Business users who are still going through the transition process? Interop provides that with you. Hybrid capability gives you that leveraged element. And again, it might be cumbersome and it might be complex, but you need to make sure that your users are comfortable and confident when they move to Teams, that they are ready to use the new interface, the new application, the new solution, and don't simply, through laziness in some guises, fall back on consequently using Skype for Business. Interop provides you with that. Interop's important because it gives you the ability for your Teams only or native users to continue to communicate with Skype for Business users. It also provides you with, as I say, that ability through hybrid to leverage the backdoor infrastructure of Skype for Business online to facilitate federated communication with legacy environments who are on-prem. Once you go native Teams and you cut the code to your Skype for Business environment, that no longer exists. So things to consider when setting coexistence mode. Functionality is provided based on what your administrators can dictate. Frankly, you can do it on an organizational basis. So again, going through the transition mode, we can forcibly put in place policy that suggests that the organization is now using full Teams native option across the board, and consequently users, as you see here, will receive a notification to tell them, you know what, your business has now moved to Microsoft Teams. So consequently, if you're ready, try it, move it across. That will consequently transparently move the users and buddy lists or contacts across into Skype for Business, and it will provide them with the ability to natively use Teams as a communication and collaboration interface. What it won't do is uninstall the Skype for Business client. So where those users who still remain in the legacy platform, as I said before, are leveraging conferencing and meeting capability through Skype for Business, your new Teams users can still backtrack and utilize or join meetings of that nature. Because the client hasn't gone, it will fire up the client on your behalf, unless obviously you've implemented a policy that uninstalls the client by way of centralized provision. You also might want to do it on a user level. You might want to just, again, if coming back to this pilot approach, you might want to forcibly only enable a certain preset number of users who have this capability, the notification to upgrade. And once you're comfortable and confident that that is all functioning and you're handling the service tickets that it might generate and produce on the basis of moving to a new technology, then you can implement your organization-wide strategy. Again, based on whatever approach is more comfortable to you and your end users. But your end users should be key in all of this. So what I like to call this is the roller coaster, because traditionally, when organizations rolled out a new solution, they would always find that the crest of the wave just didn't simply appear and everybody adopted the technology and it worked. End of story. No. Quite frankly, I'm sick of seeing little plateaus like this now, given government briefings. But anyway, what we've tended to find is you generate core skills to your end users. You inform them, you communicate with them, you tell them that Teams is coming. You notify them the prerequisite training that they might want to garner themselves with to learn the technology as it comes. You tell them what capabilities it's going to provide for them and on their behalf, and ensure that they are capable and aware of the new working practices that Teams will deliver. You ensure that you have mitigated all of the self-learning that traditionally you might have delivered and monitored using analytics such as Power BI. you still maintain that ability to ensure that where possible, you're using available technology such as SharePoint and Yammer, so that you can have open channels of communication where users who aren't using Teams can take advantage of digital champions with your organization who have quite frankly taken to it like a duck to water. This is still core in making sure that all of your end users are trained and are adopting the technology without simply finding themselves battling with it on a day-to-day basis. The curve will always have a down peak at some point whereby it's flattening off. And that generally is because something new might be coming to the product portfolio. How many times do you use Teams, or over the course of the last few months in particular, have you found that new features and functionality have been rolled out to Teams that generally you would notify end users of well in advance of it coming online, but we found ourselves in a position whereby it just simply rolls out. I remember when we went to the new multi-frame window, and end users were contacting me internally in my organization saying, wow, this is great, but where did it come from? Or alternatively, some end users were saying, I've been told it's coming, but I can't see it. Again, how do you notify and communicate to end users the new technology is coming? So a good practice to approach this is plan for the structured approach to transition. Ensure that you've still done, irrelevant of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, a full analysis and discovery of the dependencies that will prevent you moving lock, stock and barrel from Skype for Business. Consider that hybrid system architecture. Now, hybrid to me means a number of different things. It could mean to you that you're using Skype for Business on-prem with hybrid capability into the cloud and then subsequently into Teams. To others, it might mean that they've gone to a greenfield or vanilla solution of Microsoft Teams, and hybrid ability to them is the ability to utilize direct routing with an on-premise interconnect into a telco provision. Make sure you've identified not only what your traditional Microsoft-based dependencies are, but also, do you have any other bespoke or line of business applications that depend on the solution that you're providing? Make sure that you've identified, assessed, and make sure that the operational and security elements of provisioning Teams are mitigated and have no underlying issues that might generate or create longer term structural performance problems for you going forward. And it's still important to develop that management of change plan to identify where users are experiencing problems in relation to utilizing the new technology. Utilize a framework. Do your change impact assessment. Identify what is going to beset you longer term with problems. I come back to an old analogy of fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Still put your user at the heart of everything you do, but unless you've prepared for that change to Microsoft Teams, you're going to be beset by numerous inundated service tickets by users who, quite frankly, are just overwhelmed by the new interface. Make sure that you've got a community on which you can rely on. You don't necessarily want service tickets always going to your help desk. As I say, use Yammer, use SharePoint Online. Utilize an ability that gives you a number of digital champions with your organization who almost act as your first line of support. Make sure you've communicated to users the logistics and rationale as to why you're going to Teams. It might simply be that it provides you with a crisis-ready solution today that provides for all of the nuances and needs of users today, or it might be that longer term, it's simply to say Skype for Business is retiring, and consequently we are making that jump to Teams now. But tell them, make sure people know. And again, ensure that the users are trained. There are multitudes of free public domain training available from Microsoft and other partner providers that you can take advantage of. And quite frankly, some organizations simply don't. So to come back to it, adoption and change management and the user are still more critical now than ever. Don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater in relation to what you would have previously done by ensuring that users are trained and communicated to ensure a level of competency that they can utilize the best out of the product. Still provide that same level of commitment and framework that you would have always done pre-COVID, but just adapt your methodologies of doing it. Make sure that you have a strategy to communicate to users why the solution will provide them with a more productive and intuitive end-to-end day-to-day business platform. Make sure that they're aware that, frankly, you might be more comfortable and more competent with Skype for Business or Zoom or Cisco or whatever else. But this provides not just you, the user, but the business with the benefits that, frankly, you didn't have pre-implementation of Teams. Make sure you engage with the users, get their buy-in, provide use cases, business cases as to why they should use it. Make an awareness campaign, if at all possible, as to the rationale and the logistics of utilizing Teams. And by that, we can identify success factors, we can create milestones, we can create KPIs. We can ensure that the leaders in our organization align to everything that we want to do, that we have a shared value and strategy across all of our organization, be you somebody who works on the reception or on help desk, all the way through to the chief executive. If you're not driving this from the top down, why would someone working on a shop floor, for instance, adopt Teams if they see that their CEO doesn't utilize it, but actually uses Zoom? I come back to the government briefings and that confused message that we have. Make sure that all of your planning and project team structure is in place to mitigate any of the leveraged issues that you could potentially find yourself having to overcome. And make sure you've got HR alignment to this, i.e. make sure that there are policies and provision in place that meet your security, governance and compliance requirements. Just conscious of time. So we've got to Teams. Hooray, flags out, balloons up, cut cake, pop champagne corks. Everybody's happy, right? Wrong. That is simply the first step. You've got there, and that's great. You can pat yourself on the back. But Teams and Microsoft 365 as a whole is an evergreen platform. It will continually evolve and change. So make sure that with that in mind, that you have a framework that provides you with evergreening future operational readiness. That again, you can mitigate any changes of foundational functionality that might come downstream that might have an impact on your end users. Make sure that your help desk support teams are savvy and confident that as new features are released by Microsoft, that they are not simply just thrown at them, that they are aware of their onset and coming. Exploit everything at your behalf and benefit to make sure that you are providing quality of usability and experience to not just end users, but to your service desk staff, to your operational administrators, to everybody in your organization. And one last thing I'll leave you with. As I say, I know a lot of organizations who've simply said to me during the rollout of Teams during COVID, that we're going to throw it out there and users will sink or swim. They'll either adopt it or they won't. This is my perception of what that approach gives you. IT administrators simply throwing a technology out, saying they love it, and the end user looking up and saying buts. And by buts, I mean B-U-T. And with that, right on cue, I've ended my presentation. I hope you found it useful. I hope you've gleaned some elements that you can take back to your organisation from it. My contact details, as I say, are there. We do have a breakout session following this presentation. And if I could also ask you to provide some feedback on the presentation, I'd really appreciate that. And with that, back to you, Lee.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, that was a good session. I really enjoyed that. And I've just posted a link for the breakout session in the chat. So if you do have any questions, if you could make your way over there, then Tony's more than happy to speak to you. With that, I think we'll leave the session there.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.